Story 1. The Whispers of the Hollow. Deep in the heart of Blackthorn Forest, there is a place known as the Hollow. A dark clearing where the trees bent unnaturally, their branches twisting as if in eternal pain. No one in the nearby village dared enter the Hollow. Some said it was cursed, others whispered that it was a home to a restless spirit. But Eliza, the young girl who had grown up hearing these tales, was determined to prove the stories wrong. One misty autumn evening, she set out for the Hollow, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the ancient trees. The deeper she ventured, the more the air seemed to thicken, pressing against her skin like unseen hands. But she pressed on, undeterred by the eerie silence that enveloped her. She reached the clearing, but her heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The trees stood still, the ground was blanketed in fallen leaves, and the wind held its breath. But as Eliza took a step further into the hollow, she began to hear whispers, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She turned, her eyes darting around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, like a chorus of lost souls speaking over each other. Eliza's breath quickened. She spun around, trying to find the source of the whispers, but the voices only grew more frenzied. Panic gripped her as she realized the trees seemed to be closing in, their twisted branches reaching toward her like skeletal fingers. She turned to run, but her feet felt like they were sinking into the ground, held in place by some unseen force. And then she saw it. A shadowy figure standing at the edge of the hollow, its form barely distinguishable from the surrounding darkness. It raised an arm, pointing directly at her, and the whispers ceased. For a moment, there was only silence. And then the figure spoke in a voice that sounded like dry leaves rustling in the wind.
Leave this place,
It hissed.
or be lost to the hollow forever.
Eliza didn't need to be told twice. She tore herself free and ran, the whispers returning with a deafening intensity. The trees seemed to claw at her as she fled, their branches tearing at her clothes, but she didn't stop until she burst out of the forest and into the moonlit fields beyond. Grasping for breath, she turned back to look at the hollow. The twisted trees stood still, as if nothing had happened. But she knew the truth. The hollow was alive, and it did not welcome intruders. And from that night on, she never set foot in Blackthorn Forest again. Story 2. The Lantern Man. Old Man Harrington had lived alone on the outskirts of the redwood forest for as long as anyone can remember. The villagers often warned that their children not to venture too close to his cabin, especially at night. Rumor had it that he wasn't quite human, that there was something else entirely. A guardian of the woods, or perhaps a warden of its secrets. One night, young Tom and his friends, eager for adventure, decided to test the legend. Armed with nothing but flashlights and bravado, They set off into the forest, hoping to catch a glimpse of Old Man Harrington or the strange lights that were said to float among the trees. They walked deeper and deeper, the thick canopy above swallowing the moonlight, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around them. After what felt like hours, they came across a narrow, winding path. It was then that they saw it, a flickering light in the distance, like a lantern bobbing up and down as if carried by an invisible hand. The boys stared at it, both terrified and fascinated. Without a word, Tom took a step forward, and the others followed, drawn to the light like moths to a flame. As they got closer, they could see that the light wasn't from a lantern at all. It was a small, glowing orb, hovering a few feet off the ground. It drifted away from them, deeper into the woods. Tom felt a chill run down his spine, but something urged him to follow. The group continued after the light, unable to resist its allure. But the further they went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew denser, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches forming unnatural shapes. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the night, crickets, owls, the rustling of the leaves, fell silent. The boys looked around, realizing too late that they were no longer on the path. Panic set in, but Tom pressed on, his eyes fixed on the floating light. Suddenly, the light stopped. It hovered there for a moment, then began to grow, expanding into a blinding brilliance that forced the boys to shield their eyes. When the light dimmed, they saw him, Old Man Harrington. His face was pale, his eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the orb. He stood before them, holding a lantern that seemed to burn with a ghostly flame.
You shouldn't be here.
He said, his voice echoing unnaturally.
The forest doesn't take kindly to those who don't respect it.
Before the boys could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The trees creaked and groaned, their branches twisting toward the boys like skeletal hands. The light from the lantern flared, and suddenly the boys were running, sprinting through the dark forest, their hearts pounding in their chests. They didn't stop until they stumbled out of the woods and back into the village, grasping for breath. When they looked back, they saw Old Man Harrington standing at the forest's edge, his lantern casting an otherworldly glow. He raised a hand in warning, and the boys knew they had been lucky. The forest had let them go, for now. Story 3: The Echo Tree. There was a tree deep within the Mistwood Forest that stood apart from the others. A towering, ancient oak known as the Echo Tree. The villagers believed that it could capture the voices of those who spoke near it and repeat their words back in whispers long after they had left. Some said it was haunted by the spirits of those who had died in the forest. Others claimed it was a gateway to another world. Lena, a local herbalist, didn't believe much in superstitions. She often ventured into Mistwood to gather rare herbs, her path occasionally taking her past the echo tree. One day, while on one of her usual trips, she found herself standing before the massive oak. She stared at it for a moment, the wind rustling through its branches, carrying with a faint, almost imperceptible whisper.
Help me.
Lena froze, her heart skipping a beat. She glanced around, but there was no one else in sight. She must have imagined it, she thought, but the whisper came again, more clearly this time.
Help me.
Curiosity piqued. Lena stepped closer to the tree, placing her hand on its rough bark. "Who's there?" she called out, half expecting a trick of the wind to answer her. For a moment, there was only silence, and then the tree spoke again, its voice like the rustle of leaves.
Trapped. Beneath.
Lena's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at the base of the tree, her eyes searching the roots for any sign of disturbance. And there it was, a small, overgrown mound of earth that looked as though it had been recently disturbed. She hesitated, fear creeping into her mind, but the voice came again, pleading.
Please. Free me.
With trembling hands, Lena began to dig. The earth was loose and damp, and it didn't take long before her fingers scraped against something hard. She unearthed a small, intricately carved wooden box. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, urging her to open it. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a simple silver locket, tarnished with age. The moment she touched it, a cold wind whipped through the forest, and the whispers stopped. The air grew heavy, oppressive, and Lena felt a presence, a dark, malevolent force surrounding her. The tree began to creak, its branches swaying violently as if caught in a storm. Lena realized too late what she had done. She had released something. Something that had been trapped beneath the echo tree for a reason. She turned to run, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift and move, roots snaking up to grab at her ankles. She stumbled and fell, the box slipping from her grasp. The whispers returned, louder and more sinister, and the locket glowed with an eerie light. Lena scrambled to her feet and sprinted away from the tree, the voices chasing her, growing fainter and fainter as she fled. She didn't stop running until she was out of the forest, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced back, half expecting the tree to follow her, but it stood there, silent and still. She could still hear the whispers in her mind, though, and she knew she had made a grave mistake. The echo tree had been a prison, and now its prisoner was free. From that day on, Lena never set foot in the Mistwood Forest again, and when others went into the woods, they claimed to hear whispers, pleading, warning, and sometimes threatening. The echo tree was awake, and it would never rest again.